Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Beyond Right, the values that shape Judaism's civil code, lesson number 3, Beyond Taking Offense, a legal responsibility to protect. So Jack, his company is growing very successfully. He needs to expand, he needs to hire people, he needs to hire good people. So Jack is interviewing. A man walks into his office, his name is David. He is dressed very sharply. He looks at the resume and he is checking off every single box. So with a big smile, Jack looks up and says to Mark, it looks like based on this resume, you would be a perfect fit for our company. However, I need to know, Mark, are you responsible? And he says, absolutely. In the last company that I worked for, anytime something went wrong, they said I was responsible. I am your man. Right? I apologize for the horrible joke, but that is the theme of our class today, the idea of taking responsibility. Who are we responsible for? Are we responsible for our own kids? Yes, we are responsible for our own kids. But what about our extended family? What about friends? What about neighbors? What about strangers? What are our obligations? What are our responsibilities towards other people? When addressing this question, there's two sides to it. There's the legal approach, and then there's the ethical approach. But we know from the Torah perspective, right, legal is ethics, ethics is legal. Because as we discussed the past 2 weeks, Jewish law is driven by Jewish values. That means the ethics of responsibility essentially translate into Jewish law as well. And we're going to see that the Jewish law approach to responsibility has absolutely no parallel in other legal systems. We're going to begin by going right into the case studies, and we're going to do 3 case studies. The first one talks about our responsibility when it comes to other people's physical life. The second one has to do with our responsibility towards other people's financial well-being. And the third case has to do with spiritual welfare. So case study A is on page 76. It's a little bit long, but I want to highlight just one paragraph. This case study 1 discusses a very tragic shooting that took place in a church just a few years ago. Right? Dylan Roof walked into a church, shot a bunch of people. Turns out that he told one of his friends about it. His friend knew all about it, and his friend said absolutely nothing. So we're going to go with just the second paragraph on page 77. Karen, would you mind reading just the second paragraph on page 77?
During a night of drinking and drug use about a week before the shootings, Mr. Roof told Mr. Meek that he wanted to kill Black people at a historic African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston in order to start a race riot, according to FBI summaries of interviews with him. Mr. Meek was concerned enough to hide Mr. Roof's handgun after he fell asleep, but later returned it and did not report the threat to law enforcement.
Right, so we'll stop there. So in case study A, right, we have an issue of reporting a planned crime. Do you have an obligation? Do you have a responsibility to report to the police and to prevent a crime from taking place? That is case study number 1. Let's go to case study B. Sandy, would you like to read case study B? It's on page 78, the middle of the page.
Yes. Rachel strolls along the street one evening, passing a store that is closed for the night. Glancing through the window, she noticed that the air conditioner was left on when it was supposed to be turned off, costing the store owner money. Rachel is unaware of the store owner's identity, but she may be able to receive the owner's contact details from the operators of nearby stores that are still open.
So in case study number B, we have a scenario where you notice that someone is about to lose some money. What are your obligations? What are your responsibilities to alerting someone to a costly oversight? Now, the details of the case, as we're going to discuss a little bit later, are not as critical because this would apply to a wide variety of issues. It could involve the loss of a lot of money. It could involve the loss of a little money. It could involve a great effort to find the person or a very minimal effort. But the issue that is at the core, is there any responsibility or obligation that we have to prevent another person from losing money? And case study number C. We have graphs, we have charts in the book. I don't understand them. I don't know how to read them. The paragraph is complicated in itself, but this is what I can derive from case study C. Pew did a poll, the state of religion and the state of the Jewish religion in the United States in 2020. The results were bad. The results were very bad. Intermarriage is in the 70% range. It's a bad deal, right? The health and the strength of the future of Jewish identity in the United States, not very positive. The question is, when it comes to someone else's Jewish observance, do we have any obligation? Do we have any responsibility when it comes to another person's spiritual welfare? So the central question of today's lesson is, what is the Torah's perspective on the extent of our responsibility to others? When it comes to physical harm, when it comes to financial damage, and when it comes to a person's spiritual welfare, what are our obligations and what are our responsibilities? 3 cases. Now, I want to ask you for a moment if you would rank them, right? Rank these 3 cases. Which are the ones that you could make a compelling argument that there would be a legally binding obligation for you to get involved, whether it was to prevent physical harm, financial harm, or spiritual welfare? Any thoughts? Karen?
The one with the church shooting is an absolute obligation.
So number 1, absolute obligation to prevent physical harm. Any thoughts on preventing financial welfare? Does that become your problem?
It's relative to the effort that has to go into even being involved. But no, there's no absolute obligation. It's minimum financial.
So Mitchell feels that there is an obligation, but it's a more limited obligation that would depend on the effort and the circumstances that are involved. Now, what about a person's spiritual welfare? Shabbos candles, tefillin, kosher. Is there an obligation and responsibility that you have to know what's going on in your neighbor's kitchen? And how would that rank in comparison to the obligation to prevent physical harm versus financial harm?
I guess it differs depends if you're
Mitchell, you can't give away all the secrets right here at the beginning of the class.
I'm sorry, he broke up, so I couldn't hear him well.
So what he was advocating, which I think most people naturally come to this conclusion, that where would the strongest obligation be to prevent physical harm, right? That's where you really got to step in. That's where there's an obligation. When it comes to financial, to prevent financial, yes, there's an obligation, but there's going to be much more limits on when you and how you have to get involved. When it comes to spiritual welfare, most people who are not Chabad rabbis are a little bit uncomfortable meddling into people's private religious life. Now, this is very typical, and it's very understandable why a person might come to this conclusion. However, as we're going to demonstrate, that's not the Jewish perspective at all. We are talking tonight about a very important Jewish value, which is in addition to personal responsibility that we have for our own life and the choices that we make, there is a collective responsibility that we have as well. Where did this come from? The timing is unbelievably perfect, because on Sunday this week, we celebrate the holiday of Shavuos, which commemorates the giving of the Torah, and what took place when the Torah was given. Marcus, if you could please read text number 1 And you'll also read text number 2. But first go, Marcus, text number 1, please. Marcus, are you there? Are you able to unmute yourself and go for text 1 and 2? All right. Just gotta unmute yourself there.
Okay, there. Okay. Text number 1. Okay, on page 83.
Yes.
84?
83, page 83.
83. The people all responded in unison. We will do everything God has said.
So it's a very beautiful line here. We are going to read it in the Torah on Sunday, where God is giving the Torah to the Jewish people. And what is their response? We will do everything that God has said. How do we understand this verse? Personal responsibility. We have accepted upon ourselves the responsibilities and the obligations that we have for ourselves. However, the Medrash explains, and Marcus, if you could continue reading on the next page, text number 2, they are very much connected.
When the Jewish people accepted God's rule at Mount Sinai, they did so joyfully as one, as the verse states. The people all responded in unison. In doing so, they committed to serving as guarantor.
So at Mount Sinai, the Jewish people did not just pledge allegiance to God, but they pledged allegiance to each other as well. They accepted a personal responsibility in terms of their own life, but they also accepted a responsibility to each other. The word that the Medrash uses is a guarantor. What does this mean, a guarantor? So Mitchell, imagine I'm taking out a $10 million loan and you sign onto that loan. Mitchell Spector is the guarantor of that loan. What is your responsibilities here? What does that mean that you're a guarantor?
It means I may not be able to buy something for Arlene if we default.
That is one definition. Can you expand on what your responsibilities might be as a guarantor, other than Arlene suffers from no jewelry?
Well, if you're talking about a loan, you're talking about a loan is one thing. That's more just financial and believing in you and hope you can have the ability to keep your word to me. Beyond that, doesn't mean.
Mitchell, you are the guarantor of the loan. What does that mean for you?
You better pay for that air
You're gonna pay
conditioner.
for it if Rabbi defaults.
That's right. That means you are putting yourself on the line big time. If I cannot make the payment, who do we go to collect? We go
Mitchell,
straight to Mitchell to collect. That is what it means to be a guarantor, right? That is what being a guarantor is all about. That is the level of responsibility that we took for each other on Mount Sinai. That if someone else has an issue, you know whose issue it becomes? My issue and your issue, because we are guarantors for each other. We are responsible for each other. And as we're going to see, this is not just in philosophy, in theory, in theology. It's not just a sweet spiritual idea. This is a legal issue. This fact that we are guarantors for each other actually translates into legal obligations. Yes, Mitchell.
You see that already indirectly when you see that people give money to help out. If the shul says we need money and we need new air conditioners or whatever that would be, then
33,000.
yeah, then we feel some obligation to pay that amount. Or the other day, Hillel Academy had a special fundraiser. We all feel a mutual obligation in some way to help make their burden met, and it did get met.
See, but Mitchell, I'm not talking about feeling a sense of obligation. I'm talking about legal obligation, right? I'm talking taking you to court. I'm talking Mitchell and the rabbi are on TV, court case, all the papers. You know what I'm saying? 24/7 news channel, legal obligation. That's what I'm talking about, right? Johnny Depp, Amber Heard pushed off the front pages because the rabbi and Mitchell are going to court. You know what I'm saying? So we're talking today about legal responsibility, okay? Now,
Reality?
sorry, Mitchell?
In reality, there's no legal obligation.
Oh, we're going to see. That is the point of today's class. What are our legal obligations when it comes to being responsible for each other? And we have just demonstrated that from a Jewish perspective, we are guarantors for each other. Not only Mitchell for the shul's loans, but also Karen and Marcus and David and Seth. We're all guarantors for each other. What does that mean? And we also need to understand why. Why are we guarantors? Why are we responsible for each other? Why are we on the hook for each other? Whatever happened to this holy principle, live and let live? You do what you got to do. What you have or don't have does not place any responsibilities or obligations on me. Why is that the case? So we go to text number 3, a beautiful medrash. Sandy, did you read yet, Sandy?
Yeah, but I can read again. It's fine.
All right, go for text number 3, please.
Okay. All Jews are mutually responsible. This can be compared to a ship where a hole has been ruptured in one of its cabins. We do not exclaim, a cabin has ruptured. Rather, we say, the entire ship is ruptured.
So here we are presented with the classic Jewish metaphor for our responsibility for each other. Why are we responsible for each other? Why are we guarantors for each other? Because we are all on the same boat. A person cannot dig a hole, drill a hole underneath his seat and say, what's your problem? What's your issue? It's only under my seat. No. When you drill a hole under one person's seat on a boat, you're drilling a hole under the seat of every single person on the boat. From a Jewish perspective, the way that we are traveling through life is not as individuals, but as passengers together, journeying to one destination with one mission on one boat. A hole under your seat is a hole in my seat. This is the Jewish metaphor for personal responsibility. With this in mind, what do you think would the boat metaphor be for the Western version of responsibility? Right, this is the Jewish version of the boat one. What would be the secular boat one?
Save yourself.
But put it into the framework of a boat. We want a boat analogy here.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Like the Titanic.
yeah, each
If
man
the Jewish
save
people are
themselves.
all in one boat, what are people in from the secular perspective?
It's all about me. Get me out of here.
We are individual ships that pass in the night. You familiar with that expression?
Yeah, I heard that.
From a secular perspective, we're not all on one boat together. Everyone is in their own boat. Yes, there may be times when our paths may cross. My duty and obligation is what? No harm.
So,
The legal system is designed to make sure I don't crash into your boat and you don't crash into my boat. But if you decide, if there is a leak in your boat, you know whose boat the leak is in? Your boat, not my boat. So there's a very different perspective, Jewish perspective versus the secular perspective. The Jewish perspective, if you drill a hole under your cabin, it's going to affect the entire ship, every single one of us. So the Jewish perspective sees us as a passenger on one ship. Now, the Rebbe gave another metaphor that is also ship related, but this time not in the ocean, this is in space. During the whole race to the moon, right, the Rebbe gave a beautiful example. What does that mean that we are responsible for each other, that we're all in one ship? It says, imagine that the spaceship is about to launch. The countdown is going 10, 9, 8, 7, and all of a sudden, Neil Armstrong takes out a pack of cigarettes, right? Takes out his lighter, lights it up and starts smoking as they're about to hit one. What do you think the reaction would be? Everyone would go crazy. people would go nuts. Now, why? They never saw a person smoke a cigarette before. In the 60s, this was perfectly normal. This took place everywhere, all over the place. Why would people freak out and go crazy? One person decides he wants to smoke a cigarette. So the Rebbe explains that Neil Armstrong smoking a cigarette as the spaceship is about to launch is not an isolated individual event. In order to make this spaceship launch, it took hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, from taxpayer money from the government to make this happen. Tens of thousands of people had to work on it to make sure, develop the technology to make sure that this was going to take place. Hundreds and thousands of hours, years and years of study, of training, of work to make this event take place. And it wasn't important just to the people who were involved. Anyone who was alive at that time, not me, but people who were alive at that time, the tension between the United States and Russia, who's going to get to the moon first, right? The heart and the emotion of the entire country was watching this taking place. So this is not just an isolated incident involving one individual doing an act on their own. No, that act has ripple effects that would literally impact hundreds and millions of people, hundreds and millions of dollars, and so on. This is how Judaism views life. We're all passengers on one ship. Yes, we may each have our own cabins, we may each have our own responsibilities, we may each have our own function, but at the end of the day, we're all in this together. A hole under one seat is a hole under my seat. What you do matters to me. What I do should also matter to you. We need to all care about each other because at the end of the day, we're all on the same boat. Now let's try to appreciate and understand this idea a little deeper. So far we said, why do I need to care about what's going on in your life? Because you can sink my boat. That's what we said so far. Why do I care what's going on in your life? Because your life can sink my life. We're going to introduce a much more beautiful, much deeper idea, and that has to do with our souls. Text number 5. Dave, would you like to read text number 5?
Sure.
Excellent.
All Jews are interrelated because our souls are commingled, and we each share a part of each other's soul. This is why all Jews bear mutual responsibility. We each possess an actual spiritual part of our fellow. As a result, when one Jew transgresses, their action causes damage to themselves and inflicts damage to the part of them that is shared by their fellow Jews. Therefore, we should all seek out each other's benefit, rejoice in each other's successes, and respect our fellow Jew as we respect ourselves, because we really are one. This is the basis for the commandment to love your fellow as yourself.
Here we have a most beautiful idea here, that on a soul level, we are commingled. We are interconnected. We're one with each other. It's not just that you have the ability to sink me. It's that in essence, we are in fact actually one. This idea is expressed in a really beautiful story. The rabbi, whose name is Rabbi Aryeh Levine. He was known as the Tzaddik of Yerushalayim. He passed away, I believe, in 1969. The story goes that he went with his wife to the doctor because his wife's foot was in a lot of pain. He sits down with his wife at the doctor and he says to the doctor, "My wife's foot is hurting us." There's another version that I heard, "Our foot is hurting us." What was he trying to say? That he was so connected to his wife that when her foot hurts, he was hurting, he was in pain. And not because of the fact that, listen, we're married. And if my wife's foot is hurting, so obviously on some level, it will have an effect on me because my wife is in pain and is limited. That's not what he said. From his perspective and his attitude, if his wife's foot is hurting, he's in pain. Because at the end of the day, a husband and wife are one. Their souls are connected. Their souls are intermingled. There's that responsibility for each other. He felt her pain not because she can sing him, but because of the fact that they were so deeply connected. So the idea of being responsible for each other, the idea of being a guarantor for each other, what is it really based on from this perspective, right? We are truly, madly, deeply responsible for each other, because at the end of the day, on a soul level, right, we are each other. Right? Any questions, comments before we begin the next section? No? Okay. So now we understand the Jewish value. We are responsible for each other, right? We are guarantors for each other for two reasons. One, because we are all in the same boat. What happens to someone else on the boat affects me. And number two, on a deeper level, we are connected on a soul level. This value translates into Jewish law. Right? It's not just a nice idea for a rabbi's sermon. This actually translates into obligations and responsibilities. Let's go to text number 6a. Karen, could you please read text number 6a on page 88?
Do not stand by the shedding of your fellow's blood.
So here is a verse in the Torah that gives us an obligation. You are not allowed to stand by while somebody else is being injured. We are responsible for each other. We are guarantors for each other. Now continue with 6b, please, Karen.
This prohibition forbids us to refrain from intervening to save others when we see that they are in danger of death or financial loss, and we have the ability to rescue them. For example, if someone is drowning in the sea and we are able to swim out and save him, or if robbers are planning to kill someone and we are able to dissuade the plotters or protect the victim from harm. Regarding all such cases, we are commanded, do not stand by the shedding of your fellow's blood. Leviticus 19:16.
So the Rambam explains for us that if we remain silent when we are aware of a threat, that itself is a crime. We have an obligation and a responsibility to intervene. Now, if you look at this paragraph in text number 6b, you'll notice, yes, Mitchell, you got a question?
Well, does it mean to the extreme that you take a bullet for somebody?
Nope. The verse does not say that you must get killed for someone. The verse says if you have the ability to save them, then you are obligated to get involved. If you do not have the ability to save them, then you're not obligated.
You could save them by stepping in front of the bullet.
You are not obligated to step in front of the bullet to save another person. No, that obligation does not extend that far. In this text, there are two different categories, two different examples of scenarios where a person has to stand in. Anyone notice what the two different categories are? You know, maybe look at text number B for a few seconds. Do you notice two different categories or two different examples?
Between 6A and 6B.
No, in 6B.
Well, one is that more proactive where you physically have to save someone, and the other is if you can change the outcome.
Very good. I'm going to say what you said, but I will use different words, if that's okay. The two different categories are current versus future. The Rambam says that if something is taking place right now, someone is drowning in the sea, right? That's one example that he gave, right? And you are able to swim out and save them, right? If this is one example. So one example is if something is taking place right now, it's current. If a person is currently being injured, you are obligated to step in. And Rambam didn't mention it here, but you're actually obligated even financially, right? Even if it costs you money. If someone else's life is on the line, if someone else's body is on the line, not only are you obligated to step in, you're obligated to step in even if it's going to cost you money. Some rabbis are of the opinion, even if it costs you everything, even if it will bankrupt you. Other rabbis say up to 20%. Either way, you have to step in, even if it will cost you money. Now, as a side point, the person will owe you that money back, right? But you have to step in. Yes, Mitchell, you have a question?
Well, but we see all the time that person thinks they can save another person who appears to be drowning, and they end up drowning themselves and not saving the person, and they get lost instead. And you don't know that at the moment. So you have to say, well, wait a minute. I know that statistically, there's a very good chance that I will be drowned if I try to help this person now. And all I'm doing is saying, well, wait a minute. I can't take that risk.
Mitchell, the Alter Rebbe writes that if there is a risk to your life, you're not allowed to try to rescue the person. Now, what does that mean? I don't want to get too sidetracked with that, but you make a very, very good point. If there's going to be a danger to you, Mitchell, don't do it. Don't do it. A person has to make an accurate evaluation of the situation and the circumstances. What are the chances, what are the odds of me helping, or what are the chances of me getting injured? So yes, a person has to make that type of calculation. But we have to remember, this does not always involve a scenario that is dangerous. A person may have a heart attack on the street. There's no danger to you to get involved and to, whether you call the police, maybe you do CPR, right? You do something to try to help the person. There's an obligation to help a person even when there's no, in most scenarios, there's no danger to you. Yes, Mitchell.
But there's still the possibility that you're helping could be a negligent act and you get sued for it and lose everything.
Mitchell, you're going to have to take this course with me 5 times.
Okay.
Because we need to replace your legal thinking with Jewish values-based thinking. Jewish values-based thinking. Yes, there are concerns, there are issues, maybe, and you have to think about it. But what is the overriding value that is driving your decisions? I'm responsible, I'm obligated to help. If I can't help, right, that's another story, right? Do not perform surgery if you are not able to perform surgery, because you will probably be hurting the other person, correct?
Correct.
But in a situation where you can help, you got to try to help. Now,
And
from
besides, just
sorry?
because you can't swim doesn't mean you can't help.
correct.
I mean, you can always call somebody, you can find a rope and throw it at the person. You know, you don't have to jump in the water, but you have to try to help one way or another.
Absolutely. There are many ways that a person can help that does not involve putting your life on the line. Everything that we have said so far is the Jewish approach. The secular approach, you're not obligated to do anything, right? You're not obligated to do anything at all because there's a totally different perspective and attitude. Now, let's try to apply this to case study A. Dylan Roof, he says to his friend, Mr. Meek, I am going to shoot up this church. I want to start a race war. Does this guy Meek have a responsibility and an obligation to prevent this from taking place and happening? From a Torah perspective, 100% absolutely. From a secular perspective, no. He does
Really,
not.
none at all from a secular?
None.
Mitchell, you're an attorney, you want to weigh in
Why?
here?
Why? Why do you think that's the case? Secular law does not hold another person responsible. Now, I'm not saying that secular law, from a secular perspective, you shouldn't say something. Of course you should say something. I'm talking from a legal perspective. Secular law does not hold another person responsible. Mr. Meek is not responsible for from a legal perspective, from keeping that information to himself. Why would the law be like this?
Isn't that accessory to a crime though?
No,
Nope.
you didn't create the
What's
crime.
Samaritan?
Number one, generally, only acts of commission are criminalized, not omission. So from a secular legal perspective, we generally speaking cannot prosecute you for not doing something. We only prosecute people for doing things, not for not doing things. That's one answer. Another answer, it is a possible gateway to totalitarian style government. The government is not that excited about people telling on each other. There were countries like, for example, communist Russia, where everyone was constantly on the alert for any anti-communist behavior, and people were turning in each other left, right, and center, just all over the place. It does not create a healthy environment. So therefore, there is no penalty for not telling on someone, because we don't want to create this totalitarian style government. And number three, it's very difficult to determine a person's advanced knowledge. How do you know that Dylan Roof actually told Mr. Meek what he was going to do? What proof do you have? What evidence do you have that Mr. Meek actually knew the details, the specifics, in a way that he could have actually done something about it? It's very difficult to prove. So from a secular perspective, secular law does not hold another person responsible. However, from a Torah perspective, we believe in mutual responsibility. We are guarantors for each other. We are responsible for each other. And you have an obligation to stop the plot in its tracks. And if you don't, you can actually be punished in Jewish law. It is Jewish values that shape the Jewish legal system. The Jewish values have the values that a country has a huge impact on the way it treats people. I saw a story, I was going to show the video, but I'm sparing you the cruelty and the brutality of this video. In China, again, I watched the video today. A 2-year-old girl wanders into the middle of the street and she is run over by a van. Hit and run. She's lying in the middle of the street, literally in a pool of her own blood, and person after person walks by. People drive by on motorcycles, people drive by on cars, person after person after person. They do nothing. The only thing that they do is avoid stepping on her. It's mind-boggling, it's painful to witness it, to watch it, to see a 2-year-old girl in a pool of her own blood. And then you know what happens? Another van comes down the street, runs over her again. Nobody lifts a finger, not to see if she's alive, not to call the police, not to do anything, until her mother comes running, right, and lifts her body in her arm. She survived for a brief period of time, we're talking a day or two, until she succumbed to her wounds. And this was big news in China. How could you create a culture that is so insensitive, that is so uncaring for their fellow, that a 2-year-old girl could be lying in her own blood in the middle of the street and no one lifts a finger, right? Values are critical. In Judaism, we take these values seriously, and they're actually enshrined in law, which presents obligations on people. But let's move on now to financial responsibility. And I want everyone to go back to text number 6b. Is there any clue in text number 6b that can alert you to whether we are responsible to prevent financial loss? What is that, Dave? What does it say here?
To the extent we have the ability to do it, meaning like if our financial situation is secure enough, that doing so is kind of similar to, we wouldn't be expected to cause ourselves physical harm. So we wouldn't be expected to cause ourselves financial harm in the course of helping someone else.
Does it say that in the text?
Well, it says, if we have the ability to rescue them.
Before that, earlier in text number 6b,
The
earlier
second
in,
sentence,
what does it say, Karen?
the second sentence.
Read the second sentence, please.
Oh, excuse me, it's the first sentence. In,
Prohibition.
this prohibition forbids us to refrain from intervening to save others when we see that they are in danger of death or financial loss, etc.
There you go. In text number 6b, it says very clearly that Jewish law obligates a person to save another person's belongings from theft or damage. We are all on the same boat, right? Another person's loss is my loss. From a soul level, we are interconnected. If someone else is losing, I'm losing, because at the end of the day, ultimately, we're all one. If you are lacking resources, it's not good for you, and it's not good for me. So this value, right, is actually expressed in Jewish law as well, in the obligation to return lost objects. All right, Marcus, would you like to read text number 7?
You shall not witness your fellow's ox or sheep straying or ignore them. Rather, you must return them to your fellow. So must you do anything lost by your fellow.
So we have an obligation and a responsibility to return a lost item. You cannot just walk by and say, oh, wow, look at that, right? Somebody lost that item over here and continue on your way. Impossible. You are not able to do that. You have an obligation to return a lost object. Let's go to text number 8. Sandy, would you like to read text number 8?
Sure. Rabbi taught, the verse states, so must you do with anything belonging to your fellow. The mention of anything comes to include preventing damage to someone else's property. Rabbi
Hananya.
Hananya said to Rabbah, there is an earlier teaching that supports your ruling. If you observe floodwater advancing towards your fellow's field, you must erect a barrier to protect the field.
So in text number 8 here, we have an obligation not just to return an item that your fellow lost, but you actually have an obligation to prevent loss. If you see a potential future loss, you are obligated to get in there and to make sure that that loss never happens to begin with. But to what extent? How far does a person have to go to prevent another person from losing? Mitchell, text number 9, please.
If you find your own lost object alongside your father's lost object, retrieving your personal asset takes precedence. If you encounter your own lost object alongside your teachers, your personal asset takes precedence. Your assets take precedence over those of anyone else. From where is this law derived? Rabbi Yehuda quoted Rav. The verse states, so that there should be no impoverished among you. Deuteronomy 15:4. You must avoid becoming impoverished, so your assets take precedence over the assets of anyone else. However, Rabbi Yehuda quoted a warning issued by Rav. People who are strict in their application of this principle will eventually meet the impoverished state that they are seeking to avoid.
So we have an obligation to prevent another person's loss. What is the limitation on that based on text number 9? What is the limitation of our legal obligation to help someone to prevent them from losing money? What is the line that you don't have to cross?
Well, that you would become impoverished yourself.
Exactly. If it is going to cost you money to help another person to prevent them from financial loss, you're not obligated to help. So here's the difference between physical versus financial. When it comes to physical, you are obligated financially. When it comes to prevent a financial loss, you are not obligated to financially lose. Okay, that's the difference. However, what did the last paragraph conclude? Where are we here? All right. A person does not have to save another's assets if doing so will come at a personal loss, right? However, what did the sages say at the end over here? People who are strict in their application of this principle will eventually meet the impoverished state that they're seeking to avoid. Right? Jewish value. We are concerned, responsibility, we're guarantors. There's no obligation to spend your money to help someone from losing financially, but you know what? There's still the idea, the value is still strong, and you should do so anyway. Now, how much effort are we required to expend? So we have already established it's not costing us any money. It's not costing us any money from our pocket. But for us to prevent another person from losing money, some measure of effort and time, it is going to cost. What should that limitation be? Let's go to text number 10. David, would like to read text number 10?
If we encounter lost items of insignificant value, to the point that if they were our own, we would not bother to collect them and take them home. We are nevertheless obligated to make the necessary effort to restore them to their owner. The rationale is that we have the right to relinquish our possessions if their value is outweighed by the physical burden that they impose. However, we have no right to unilaterally relinquish someone else's ownership over their possessions. The Torah does not allow us to spare any effort, even if the effort is great and the value of the item is minimal.
This is a really beautiful paragraph here. Karen, you have some thoughts? You've got to unmute yourself.
Sorry, I thought it was unmuted. Go
Okay.
ahead and I'll wait and ask my question if you don't answer it. My apologies.
So the Alter Rebbe says something very beautiful here, and that is, when it comes to your own money, a person can make a cost-benefit analysis. For me to get involved, when it comes to my own money, it's more valuable for me to lose this item than to spend the time dealing with it. When it comes to your own pocketbook, you're in charge, it's your responsibility, you can make that decision. However, when it comes to someone else's money, you have no right to make that calculation. For you, you may be okay with losing that money, but you cannot say that about someone else's money. The Alter Rebbe says quite strongly here, you absolutely have to make some significant effort to make sure that you do not, that your friend does not incur a loss. Now, what's the limitation? Financial. It doesn't have to cost you money. And yes, a person can calculate time is money. My time is money. If the reality is by you getting involved, it literally is going to cost you money, then you can have a strong argument. But if it's only going to cost you time and effort, you would be obligated to get involved. So now let's go to case study B. Yes, Karen.
Could you give an example?
Case study B is
No,
going to
no,
be
no, back in making an effort. So we're talking about, it talks about how the value of the item is minimal. You know, I go for a walk and in winter, you often see, oh, someone lost their glove. But it's on the street. It's not at the grocery store parking lot where I can go take it back and put it to the service desk and in case someone comes and finds their glove. I'm on a walk and there's a glove or a scarf or a hat. What am I supposed to do?
So that's a great question, and it depends on a few different factors, right? Number one, the location that the person lost it. Is it the type of location where a person would expect that someone will find it and will return it to them, or is it the type of place where there's very little chance that they'll ever see it again? Is the item that you found unique, that a person has the ability to identify it? Is there an actual place where you can bring it to that you'll be able to actually find the person who lost it? Because you're not expected to knock on every door in the entire city of Milwaukee until you find the person. Oh, not them, next door, right? Obviously, that's not going to work. So you will have to factor in what the realistic chance of you actually finding the original person. But yes, a person is obligated to spend the time and the effort to return the item to the original person. Now, again, if you are in a rush, you're busy, there's somewhere that you have to be, and so on, then you may not be obligated. But if it's just going to end up that you end up 1 hour, you're going to come home an hour later, but it's not going to cost you any money. Yes, the person's obligated to go find the person. And in the case study that we have over here, this woman, Rachel, noticed that this store has their air conditioner on. Now, depending on where you live, although probably, I guess, an AC costs money no matter where you live. And it could be this person realizes and recognizes that the standard practice in town in this area, every business shuts off their AC at night. Otherwise, it's 12 hours money down the drain, and no one does that. If you don't have any other pressing obligations that's going to cost you money, you are obligated to find the owner and to notify them. Even if you yourself would say, you know what, I would rather lose however much money it costs than have to go out and find the person. Too bad. You can make that calculation on your own pocketbook. You cannot make that calculation on someone else's pocketbook. Again, from a Jewish perspective, we are responsible for each other. We are guarantors for each other. We're all in the same boat. On a soul level, we're interconnected. We have to take the time and we have to take the effort to prevent a person from financial loss. So a person should spare no effort when assisting another at a loss. Any questions before this? We got one more point we have to make in this section. Now, what happens if you decide, you know what, I'm not interested. It may not cost me any money, but I'm not interested in spending the next hour trying to figure out who the owner of the store is so they can shut off the air conditioner. What that means is the air conditioner is on for 12 hours and it costs the person $50. Right? Let's say that's what it cost them. You have now caused your friend to lose $50. Are you responsible for that $50? Do you now owe your friend $50? The answer is no. But even though you are obligated and you were responsible to tell the person about it, you are not obligated for the $50 for a very simple reason. You are not the direct cause of the loss. Right? You didn't cause the loss. You're an indirect cause of the loss. Therefore, you're not on the hook. However, what if you don't go? How do we view such a person? Marcus, you want to read text number 11?
Well, yeah,
Page 93.
okay. Those who could rightly testify for somebody but fail to do so are not legally liable to provide compensation for the damage they could have prevented. However, such people will not be granted divine forgiveness until they pay for the damage.
So in this case, if you caused another person, if you could have prevented another person from losing money and you didn't get involved, legally there's nothing we can do, but God is not happy with you, right? God is not happy with you. What should our attitude be? It's my brother, my sister is hurting, is in pain, is going to lose. You're going to jump in to act and do what you can to help. All right, let's move on to, okay, so we did that. Let's move on to our spiritual responsibility. A person can argue, listen, it's personal, it's private, I don't want to get involved. However, I think you've all noticed that what's the theme of the class? It's not personal, it's not private, right? We are all in the same boat. Our souls are interconnected. We have an obligation to do something. My spiritual health is your concern, and your spiritual health is my concern as well. Right? Where are we over here? All right. We'll get to that on the PowerPoint here in a second. All right. Text number 12 and text number 13. David, please.
You shall surely critique your fellow, and you will not share in their guilt.
So here we have an actual mitzvah. There's a mitzvah in the Torah that says someone else's spiritual life is your business. Just as it is a mitzvah to fast on Yom Kippur, it's a mitzvah to get involved with your friend's spiritual business. How? Text number 13. Continue, please, David.
One should not say, I will act righteously, and if others choose to stray from the path of righteousness, that is a matter between them and God. This attitude is antithetical to Torah values. Rather, we are commanded to do the right thing ourselves and to see to it that others too conduct themselves appropriately.
See, there's a expression that in polite company, you do not talk about religion or politics. Are you familiar with this expression? Another person's religion, what they do with their spiritual religious life, their business. The idea of speaking to somebody about religion, getting involved in their spiritual life, we're very uncomfortable with that. It seems so critical, you're so judgy, you're meddling in another person's life. From a Torah perspective, is that the case? No way. Absolutely not, right? What do we mean by that? How? Because when you get involved with another person's spiritual life, it's not because you're a nudge, it's positive, it's constructive. It comes from a place of warmth. It comes from a place of love. Rambam explains to us how. Text number 14. Mitchell, how would you like to read text number 14?
How to critique. When we critique others, whether regarding an interpersonal issue or a religious matter, it should be done in private. We must speak patiently and gently, clarifying that we are motivated solely by their welfare and our desire that they merit reward in the world to come.
So the Rambam tells us, how do we do this? You don't talk to them with the microphone and with the speaker and with signs and protest outside their house. That is not what the Torah says when it means that we should get involved with the religious life of other people. The Torah is saying something very, very simple. All of us here are in the same boat. All of us here are part of the same family. If your brother, if your sister, if your child was going through some type of spiritual challenge, would you not help out? Would you not get involved? Would you not put an arm on their shoulder, speak to them lovingly, speak to them in a positive fashion, speak to them in a constructive manner? That's what we're talking about. Not being a nudge, not being a pain in the rear, not being disrespectful, but it's recognizing and appreciating we're all one big family, right? On a soul level, we're all connected. All the Jewish people are family. Therefore, in a similar fashion, the same way that you would approach and you would speak to a family member, think about other people in the community as well. We have an obligation and a responsibility as well.
Esky, could you give an example, please?
Give an example?
Yes.
I'll give you an example. Okay. Karen, did you light Shabbos candles last Friday night? Do you need some Shabbos candles? I have some Shabbos candles. Is that an appropriate question? An inappropriate question? I could have done it better, right? I probably could have done it better, maybe. But that's exactly what we mean here. In a circumstance where you have the ability to positively influence someone, you should. If you will just annoy the person, then you should not. Just as you would not annoy your child. Would you annoy your son if they're not going to listen to you?
I thought my job was to annoy my sons.
Well, there's certainly some truth to that. Right? There is a general rule, right, that you only speak to someone if there's a chance that they're going to listen to you, right? If there's no chance they're going to listen to you, there's no reason to do so, right? So the same thing. If you're going to knock on your neighbor's door and you're going to talk to them about keeping kosher, and they're going to look at you like you're crazy from another planet and slam the door in your face, should you do that?
No, it's gonna.
No, you probably should not do that. However, right, because of the fact that we are responsible for each other, and at the end of the day, we are one big family, and we only want the best for each other, you might figure out a time, a circumstance, and a place where maybe you could introduce the idea of kosher. So we are responsible, privately, gently, patiently. There may be an opportunity where we could say, you know, there's a really beautiful mitzvah in the Torah called mezuzah. Right? Would you like to learn about it? Right? Would you like to see what a mezuzah looks like? I can help you put up a mezuzah. Right? This is what the Torah means. So words that come from the heart enter the heart. All right. Case study number C. The Pew Report. Terrible, disastrous. The numbers on the status of Jewish life in America. Should you get involved? Should you do something about it? Absolutely. Right? It is the feeling of mutual Jewish responsibility. You are concerned. Now, Karen, you asked me what to do about it. It's hard to quantify our responsibility to our fellow Jew, right? It's hard for me to say, you must do this. You can't do that. However, inaction is not an option. That's not an option, right? There is a hole that is being drilled underneath the seat of a boat that you're on. Inaction is not an option. We have to figure out some type of way. Now, this obligation that we have to help another person spiritually actually translates into a very interesting series of laws. Typically, you're not allowed to use anyone else's stuff because that's called stealing, right? If you touch something that doesn't belong to you, that is theft. Now, what if you don't have a chauffeur? You don't have a chauffeur. It's Rosh Hashanah, right? And you see somebody else's chauffeur. They are not around for you to ask them for permission to use it. Are you allowed to take that person's chauffeur, blow the chauffeur to fulfill the mitzvah of shofar on Rosh Hashanah? What do you think? Any thoughts? Any thoughts on whether you can take someone else's shofar without permission on Rosh Hashanah? Mitchell, yes.
Says yes, because you think that something you would automatically assume the owner would like you to do it.
Right, why don't you read the text, Mitchell? All right, go to text number 15 and you can read that text.
1 second. It is permissible to use someone else's chauffeur without advance permission in order to fulfill the mitzvah. We assume that people would happily oblige others to perform a mitzvah with their possessions, provided that no financial loss is incurred as a result.
This again is a very beautiful idea that does not apply to other people's physical possessions. Just to give an example, right? A baseball glove. Let's say you would like to play some baseball, but you don't have a glove. And what do you see sitting right there? Somebody else's baseball glove. Are you allowed to take their baseball glove and go play? Absolutely not. Why? Number one, that's called stealing, right? Stealing is frowned upon from a Jewish perspective. But why can't you just assume that your friend would let you use it? You can't assume that because it's another person's baseball glove and they may not want anyone touching it, anyone uses it. It's their glove. It fits perfectly to their hand. It works perfectly for them. They don't want anyone else touching it. Yet when it comes to mitzvah items, we are assuming that the other person will allow you to use it. Why are we assuming that? Because we are all responsible for each other. My mitzvah is your mitzvah. Your mitzvah is my mitzvah. Jewish law assumes that Karen Melton is happy for any person to use her shofars. Any person could use it. Why? Because exactly the same way it's Karen's mitzvah to hear the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, it's going to be Mitchell's mitzvah to hear the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, and therefore Karen is happy to use it. Would Karen let Mitchell use her baseball glove? Maybe not. That could be an issue. But because of the fact that Jews are responsible for each other, we are guarantors for each other, therefore we are assuming that you will let anyone else use your mitzvah because it's your mitzvah the same way it's their mitzvah as well. Is that not a powerful idea?
Well, it works two ways. Number one, hello?
Yeah, we can hear you, Marcus. Go.
Okay, number one, it should be up to the person, because if you let somebody else use your shofar, what if they drop it and damage it?
You are not allowed to drop and damage someone else's shofar. And
Well,
if
that
you do
doesn't
so, you have to
sound-
pay for it. You're absolutely obligated to pay for it. Now, what are the limitations on the principle? The limitations on the principle is you can only do this occasionally, right? You cannot do this on a regular basis. You cannot show up to shul every single day and use someone else's tefillin, right? That's not going to work. However, once in a blue moon, you forgot your tefillin and you need to borrow someone else's tefillin and they're not there, okay, so maybe you could use their tefillin. So point number one is what, Mitchell?
You modify it to use it.
Can you modify it? No, you're not allowed to modify it. So the first condition is that it has to be an occasional thing. You cannot do this on a regular basis. It has to be temporary. Number two, if you have the possibility to confirm with the person, you have to confirm. You can't just say, I'm going to use their stuff. If you have a phone and they have a phone and you can say, do you mind if I use your tefillin? That's what you should do, right? Only if you can't confirm, you should do it. And number three, you cannot move you can't change the location. You can't modify the item and you can't take it with you somewhere. Pick up the shofar, blow it exactly where it is. All right, Mitchell, you have a question?
One is you just have to wait 5 minutes for the person to come to shul to ask in person. You wait 5 minutes.
Yes, you should wait 5 minutes. Yeah. So there are some limitations on this idea, but the underlying principle is so beautiful that because of the fact that we are all responsible for each other, we're like one big family in this regard. Therefore, the legal assumption is you have granted full permission for someone else to use that item. All right. Another expression is you have the ability to do a mitzvah on behalf of another person. Now, this is not in all scenarios, but I'll give you a great example. On Shabbos, it's the mitzvah to make kiddush. You're not allowed to eat until you make kiddush. The mitzvah does not apply to the rabbi of the community. The mitzvah doesn't apply only to the head of the household. The obligation applies to every single person individually for them to make kiddush, and only then can they eat. However, what often happens, one person makes kiddush on behalf of the other people say amen, and the person who recited the kiddush has fulfilled the obligation for each and every single person. The same principle is with blowing the shofar. Every single person has obligation for the shofar, yet one person is able to blow that shofar on behalf of every person. The same thing with reading the Megillah and everyone. Now, what if you already made kiddush? That means you have already fulfilled your obligation for kiddush. Done. You are no longer obligated to make kiddush anymore. However, another person is there, did not yet hear kiddush. They're not so good with the Hebrew. And they say, could you please make kiddush for me? Can you do that? Are you allowed to do that? The reason why this is a big question is for two reasons. Number one, if you're not obligated to make kiddush and you say God's name, you are taking God's name in vain. That's one of the 10 commandments. That's pretty big. Number two, the blessing that you make, you're saying, you commanded me, you obligated me in making kiddush. But if you already fulfilled your obligation for kiddush, you're actually not obligated to make kiddush. So you're lying. The blessing that you make is false. Are you allowed to make a kiddush for another person? A second time, a third time, a fourth time? What do you think?
Yes.
Sandy, you want to read text number 18?
Sure. With regards to all blessings, the rule is that people who have fulfilled their own obligation can nevertheless repeat it for the sake of causing others to fulfill their obligation.
So Jewish law says quite beautifully, this responsibility to allow a person to make a blessing on someone else's behalf. Why? Because if one of us is lacking, we are all lacking. I don't know if you realize how radical this idea is and how beautiful this idea is. You made Kiddush. You fulfilled your obligation already. But if there's another Jew that did not hear Kiddush, your Kiddush is incomplete. Your Kiddush is lacking to the extent that you can say the bracha again with God's name, and you can say, you have commanded me, you have obligated me. Why? If one of us is lacking, we are all lacking, right? This idea that we're interconnected, the idea that we are responsible for each other, that we're guarantors for each other, applies to this extent. Text number 19. David, only text number 19, please.
The reason for this law is that all Jews are responsible for each other in mitzvah-related matters. Consequently, if my fellow hasn't yet fulfilled their mitzvah obligation, I haven't completely fulfilled my own obligation either.
All right, so let's review what we learned today. There's a Jewish value of mutual responsibility. We're responsible for each other. We are guarantors for each other. Two examples we gave to explain this. One, it's like we're all in a boat together. If someone drills a hole under their seat, it's a hole under all of our seats. On a deeper level, our souls are all interconnected with each other. We are literally one. We are one family, which means we are obligated to help each other. We're responsible for each other physically, financially, and spiritually. And as Mitchell said right at the beginning of the class, it's these very values that drive everything that Chabad does. The Rebbe taught very clearly that we are responsible to care for every Jew's well-being like you would for your own family, because in reality, we are one family. And this is what drives Chabad to open Chabad houses in every corner of the world. Now, I want to show a quick video. It's not playing automatically in the PowerPoint, so I'm just going to share my screen again, and God willing, it'll work beautifully. This is a video of a Farbrengen of the Rebbe sharing and expressing this idea, and I believe you'll see the date. It goes all the way back to the 50s.
der Fall, was Kol Israel Arevin ze beze. Nur das meint mir nach viele Aiden, was gefinnt sich bekatz wie Tevel, und ist sich mit dem keinmal nicht zusammengetroffen. Punkt als wie sich hat sich lieb, und mit Dides und non Agbolis, hat da sein der Linie von Avas Israel auf der Zweiten. Und in was besteht, hat die Jahwe, ist in der Linie von Teiro Mitzvah, sein Nechet alle Jiden, Arevin, Zeba, sie können nicht sein, der Limo der Teire Beschleimus und der Kima Mitzvah Beschleimus, Bishas Achelik von dem, was Kol Israel, Kulam Yachad, ist Kima Schleimo, ist der Chelik, Leisator, nicht Scholem, Belimo der Teiro, und nicht Scholem, Bekima Mitzvah. Und das soll sein verbunden mit allen Jiden, wo sie sollen sich nicht gefunden.
The Rebbe continues to explain here that the responsibility is not just for people who are officially Chabad rabbis and Chabad Rebbetzins, that we are all responsible for each other. If there's one Jew who doesn't have, that means we don't have. What we have is lacking. And it's not so hard, it's not so complicated. Invite a friend to a class, right? You can say to your friend, think about all the friends that you have. Which of my friends, if I would say, I'm going to a class that I love, and you know what? I think you would love too. Is that so hard, right? Is that so complicated? It's our responsibility, it's our obligation. You have a Shabbos dinner at your house, right? Think, which friend do I have that I know is not having their own Friday night dinner? That I could call them up, I can say, why don't you join me for a Shabbos dinner? What friend do you have that say, you know what? It's the holiday of Shavuos. There's a great event taking place at the shul. They're reading the 10 Commandments. There's cheesecake, there's ice cream, there's a class. Why don't you come with me? You love it, you'll enjoy it, and so on. Right? The same thing applies. A mezuzah, tefillin, kosher, all of these type of issues, right? If we genuinely feel I am responsible for my brother, for my sister, for my children, also for my neighbor, even a Jew that I never met before, like we have an obligation and we have a responsibility to be there for each other. I want to share one other thing here. I got to pull it up. This is the summary video, so hold on a second. I have to actually pull it up first.
Lesson 3.
Beyond taking offense. 1. Judaism has a very broad definition of mutual responsibility. It's based on a vision of shared purpose and mission, which is influenced by each action of every person. 2. In addition to a shared mission, Jewish mysticism teaches that our souls are united. 3. Jewish law considers it a crime to remain silent when aware of a threat to someone else's life, and it also mandates that we extend every effort necessary to protect others from monetary loss. 4. The Jewish value of mutual responsibility calls on us to guide others away from transgression of the Torah's commandments. This must be done gently and be motivated by genuine concern for their spiritual welfare. 5. Jewish law also teaches that we are responsible to assist others in the performance of mitzvot. Our own mitzvah observance is incomplete until we do so.
All right. So God willing, next week, Wednesday, lesson number, hold on, that's already this week's class, right? Next week, we'll continue with lesson number 4 to continue learning ideas relevant to this week's class. Go to myjli.com/beyondright for more information, classes, lectures, all kinds of information about the topic that we studied tonight. This week on Sunday is the holiday of Shavuos. At the shul, we're having a huge party, 10 Commandments, reading of the 10 Commandments. Children's program begins at 10:45. Dairy, lunch, buffet, ice cream party starts at 12:30. If you have not been to the shul for Shavuos, you're missing out. We literally recreate the giving of the Torah. Moses comes down the mountain. It's incredible, something to see. Rabbi Avremi, fake beard. We have a mountain. It's incredible. You got to see there. You want to be a part of it. It's incredibly interactive. The best food and some of my wife's homemade ice cream, right? Caramel macchiato. You don't want to miss it. So that's Sunday. And then Monday, the second day of Shavuos, is Yizkor. So we have Yizkor as well. It's about 11:30, 11:45 on Monday. And big announcement over here. On Thursday, June 16th at 7 p.m., we're going to be having a special whiskey tasting with Milk and Honey. Right? Milk and Honey is an Israeli whiskey company, and we're going to be having 2 representatives from Milk and Honey. They're going to bring a whole variety of whiskeys, and we're going to taste, we're going to enjoy. However, this is a Club Mensch event, right? This is a Club Mensch event. So Thursday, June 16th, 7 p.m., we're going to have a fabulous whiskey tasting with Milk and Honey. Save the date. Look forward to that. All right. Any questions, comments on anything that we learned tonight?
Yeah, I just want to say about the Dylan Roof issue. I'm sure the police get millions of calls that can be crank calls of somebody committing a crime, and it turns out to be a false, something false. When you talk about getting involved,
It's a very good point. The reality is that if Mr. Meek would have actually called the police, they may not have done anything. No crime has been committed. You're telling them a crime will be committed. Again, the police have limited resources and they might not have been able to do anything. A point that I forgot to mention earlier here is that just for omitting to call the police, you cannot be prosecuted. But if you do an act to conceal that information, then you could be prosecuted, right? If you did an act to conceal information, that you could be in trouble. But if you simply know information and don't say anything, then you will not be held responsible. I have heard, although I don't know the details, you might not be criminally responsible, but you might be able to be sued for not sharing this information and be financially liable, but I don't know the details of that. But that actually might be an issue.